I'm Michael Monaghan, and I'm really excited to have Ryan and Bob from Payne Capital Management today. The first thing I've got to ask out of the gate, you're both very accomplished runners. Who's faster?
Definitely
Well,
Bob.
yeah, I was more, I'm more of a lazy runner, so I was more of a sprinter than Ryan. Ryan was more of a distance guy. So, I'd be in I could run the 4x4. He could run the 10K. So it's
Yeah.
totally different classes of running.
Sadly, I didn't inherit Bob's speed, so I had to go the longer distances. So that's basically how it worked.
Fair enough. Understood. My oldest sister was a long distance runner, but I chose the triple jump. It seemed to have about the right amount of high speed running for.
Field
But
events. Come on, man.
yeah, on that, running both sprinting or long distance, uh, it takes a fair amount of discipline. What do you think that discipline, how has it translated later in life into your advisory business?
Yeah, that's a great question because I think anybody that competes in sports, whether it's high school or college, it's great training for the business world. Because you have to be self motivated. You have to be, you have to control your emotions. Whether you're in a team sport or an individual sport, you get to depend on yourself. So I think that, I mean, I know when I interview people that I've hired over the last 50 years, always look in their resume to see if they're participated in any type of sports endeavor. I think there's always shows a lot of character and discipline and great attributes and characteristics to have in the business world.
Yeah, I would just add to that. I mean, I think running specifically is such a grind, especially if you're a long distance runner. If you want to go to a track meet in college where there's no audience, it's usually for a long distance race,
Yep.
and it is a grind, right? It's really a grind. I think running we start our business from scratch. It certainly there is no one there cheering you on the way. So I think that kind of learning to grind with no audience is probably a good way to describe like running, starting a business and making it successful is very, very similar.
I think that's pure gold. And I was thinking later on as we got deeper in, I would ask, talk about a time in your business where it really felt, that difficult push through. And I think that's an analog for someone like you, Ryan, who's a very accomplished long distance runner. There's a point in that race where you have to tell your mind to keep going. Bob and Ryan, where did you see that in building your business with that analog of that point in the 10K where you got to push through the wall?
Hmm, that's a good one.
I can tell you where. Basically, we got to a point where we started a partnership with another firm, and all of a sudden, we started getting all this volume of new clients or potential clients, which we never had before. And we had to go from like doing our proposals by hand, putting everything on the spreadsheet, to actually systematizing it to almost like when you go to a fast food restaurant and the person knows how to make the order the same way every time. So we built almost like an assembly line for our proposals, because if we didn't at that point, it was impossible to keep running the business the way we were. So I think we had to start thinking more about working on the business as opposed to in the business. So starting to create things that were more streamlined really, I think, put us to that next level of where Bob and I saw ourselves less as just like financial advisors handling one account at a time, versus people coming into our firm and going through a pain process where really our hands weren't in it the whole time, right? We had a team that was doing everything. And I think that was probably when our growth really started to accelerate, Bob, in my recollection.
Yeah, I agree with you there, Rye. I think that you can't win every race. You don't win every proposal. So you're dealing with the thrill of victory and the agony of defeat when you're running a business in the RIA space. So, but been more ups and downs. I can tell you that, Michael. I don't know if we've been lucky or blessed, but we've had more success than we've had failure.
That's incredible, and congratulations. And the thrill of victory and the agony of defeat was one of my father's favorite quotes. And we'll get into how special it is, you two working together. But that really spoke to me when you shared that. Uh, you spent a lot of time inside a good organization, the Thundering Herd. What did you learn inside of Merrill that inspired you to then say, I'm really fascinated, passionate about this business, but I see things that need to change? What did you see and what did you want to take out of the organization?
Man, do we have enough time for this one, Ryan?
As
I'll give you
much
the
as
floor,
much
Bob.
time as you'd like. I think you guys have a hard stop, but I'll let the camera roll because I bet you this is pure gold, and I would really encourage people to
Mm.
listen to this.
Well, Michael, this is my 51st year in the industry, so I've been around for a long time, right? I started in the mid 70s with Mother Merrill, and I'll tell you, it was a great place to be at and a great place to be from. Um, wonderful years. I had wonderful years at Merrill Lynch, and one of the things that happened to me is I I kind of didn't like the whole process of wirehouses and the way Wall Street worked. Right, you had the private client group, which were what financial advisors. I mean, we started out as stockbrokers, and then we were customer men, and then we were financial advisors and financial consultants. They kept changing the title, but basically the idea was the same. That the firm would create a product, and then they would ask you to find somebody to sell it to. And after doing that for a couple of years, I said, this is not what I want to do for the rest of my life. So I did something very radical back in the late 70s and early 80s. I stopped going to the Merrill Lynch office. I stopped going to the offices, just went to see my clients and sat down with them with a pad and a pen and found out about them and created. I went back to the firm. I said, "Hey, I want to do a financial profile of my client." They said, "We don't have one. Why don't you create one?" So I created the first financial profile that Merrill Lynch was using back in the late 70s and created a process which I coined a name. It's called A to B, right? Get a client from point A, where they are now, to point B, their goals, their dreams, with their values. And, it became a consultative process. And so I had tremendous success with that because, a client, it's all about relationships. And, you don't earn trust just by working for a good firm or being a good person. Trust is earned along the way. So the process leads to trust. And, you know, up till maybe 80, I guess up till 87, Merrill followed the same process of, creating product, distributing product. And then we had that big 35% drop in the market, and suddenly everything changed. And the following year, Merrill Lynch actually came to me and said, "I don't know what you're doing different, but you're growing. No one else is. Everybody's waiting for the recession or the depression to happen from the big drop last year." And for one thing led to another, I became the advanced training program at Merrill Lynch for the top advisors. And so I got a really good idea, a good way to see how every advisor worked. Like we had like 17, 18,000 advisors. I'd either trained or spoke to a majority of them. And then I got this crazy idea that I could do this outside of Merrill Lynch. So I created a consulting business. And that worked out really well. It gave me an opportunity to see all of Wall Street. I worked with all the major firms and really saw that there weren't many differences. And along the way, Ryan started the industry, and I kept telling him, I said, the future of the industry is not the wirehouse, it's not the bank, it's not the insurance company, it's the independent route. So when I got tired of teaching other people how to do this and decided to parachute back into the practice, Ryan said, "That's great. Let's do it somewhere else. Let's do it as an independent because you've been saying that's the future, and that's what we decided to do after looking at every other avenue."
Do you
Ryan,
want
do
to
you want to
chime in
add
when
any
you?
more on that?
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. No, no. I think I give Bob all the credit for that. He had really the foresight at that time. I was working at Merrill Lynch as a sole practitioner, and he wanted to get back into the business. And really, Bob was the one that said, "I think this independent model is going to be the future." And frankly, I wasn't great in a corporate environment, so to me, it was just something to do. So I was like, "All right, let's do it this way." So basically, I brought all my clients out of Merrill Lynch. This is in July of 2008, right before the financial crisis basically started. We brought 98% of the clients over, but who's counting? And Merrill Lynch went out of business that fall. So I attribute it to the fact that I had left the firm. But really, it was because they had this, huge crisis in these levered mortgages that they were obviously trading in. So yeah, I think I give Bob really the credit. He really had the foresight. And what's remarkable is the way he was running his practice at Merrill Lynch. I can go back as far as the 90s. Even the spreadsheet he had built for us to diversify assets. we still use really a version of that today. Now we've improved it over time, but those basic concepts Bob came up with in the mid '80s, we still deploy today, which is actually remarkable. So a lot of those philosophies that Bob came up with have really been the backbone of our firm for all these years, and it still works. It's remarkable. Same philosophies are almost timeless, no matter what the different market conditions are, whatever the different events are. It still works to this day, which is really cool.
That is very cool, and it kind of speaks to your founder mentality of building good systems to serve your customer. But going all the way back to Bob, what I heard was the most important place you started with was with the customer. You learned deeply from your customer and worked backwards from that, and then created the systems to serve them.
Yeah, it's always been the flaw of Wall Street, Michael. They create products that are, you know, universal in their application. Here's a great idea. Put it in everybody's account, right? And I guess if they're just in a distribution mode, it's a great way to run a business, but not a great way to have your money invested. So to me, it's just a common sense idea. Instead of the firm creating products for me to sell to someone, go to the client, find out what they need, and go back to the firm and say, this is what I need to achieve the client's goals. So to me, it's just common sense. But I guess from a corporate perspective, it's a little harder to implement.
Yeah, that makes sense. And on that innovative thinking, I think, Ryan, and we'll show more later as we talk. But you're a free thinker. You build with an entrepreneur's mindset. How are you doing that I think we've started to answer it, but maybe we'll double tap it. You're in a very consensus driven industry. Um, how do you continue to drive the business, stepping out of consensus?
Eh, Well, I think that's kind of the basis of our business. I think Bob and I, by nature, are contrarians. So, and I think it's worked really well for us. I mean, I think Bob has always been an entrepreneur. I found that I was an entrepreneur as well, especially when I stepped outside of Merrill Lynch. My ability was really business development. Again, was able to build a whole proposal process where it took Bob and I out of the equation. So I think we work really well together because we're very entrepreneurial. I don't think we've ever in our entire career gone to an industry event. So, and because we think the consensus, we just think it's the most unentrepreneurial business you can possibly be in. And funny enough, if you really look at where any of our ideas come from, it's probably other businesses who are able to implement it to the financial services business, as opposed to going to the latest convention to get the best ideas. So I think that free thinker, contrarian type of view is why we've been so successful. Because I think our firm doesn't look like a lot of other firms, and we certainly haven't gotten our ideas from other firms because it tends to be a little bit of a backwards industry, and a lot of things don't change. I mean, I've been in the business for 25 years, which is actually kind of wild. I think I've been on that long as well. And there's not really new errors on Wall Street, right? It's just like, again, Bob's same process we still use today is still superior to the typical model on Wall Street because it just really doesn't change that much. And we keep hearing, oh, it's going to be different this time with artificial intelligence. It's going to be different this time because we're going to be able to offer estate planning services. All this stuff has been done before, but human behavior hasn't changed at all. And I think that the human relationship is such a key part of this business. And if you don't emphasize that, I don't think you can really be successful.
I was going to say, just to piggyback on that a little bit, there isn't any institutional memory when it comes to business. It's like almost every 25 years the cycle repeats. And it's almost as if investors have to learn the hard way, right? You have to touch the electric fence, as Ryan says, at least once.
Yep.
Um, we've been contrarian by nature. I think one of our clients coined a phrase that we're pragmatic contrarians. So we use history as a guide. We invest in evidence-based portfolios, and we try not to be consensus in our opinion. We try to be contrarian because everybody wants to be contrarian until they stand in front of a room of their peers, and they want to make sure that they don't say anything that's contrarian. So, it's really hard to be a contrarian. But it's to me, buy low and hold forever is a great strategy. And and unless you're a contrarian, you'll never buy low. You're always going to be, running with the crowd.
I think that's a really wise observation. And something else I'm noticing, like I want to move beyond business for a minute and we'll come back to it. It's clear that you two have a lot of joy in your work. It's clear that you have joy working with each other. What's it been like, working together as a father-son team? I think that's a really incredible thing that not everyone gets to experience.
Yeah, I don't want to jinx it, but it is the easiest relationship I have. I don't think we've ever, and this is not even an exaggeration. I don't think we've ever argued once about the business. We tend to see eye to eye. I think there's something special about the fact that we built this business together, as opposed to maybe I'm inherit dad's business. The fact that we really started this from scratch. It's always been our vision. The risk we've taken it collectively. We're 50-50 partners. And we really built this. Really, it's our brainchild. We have great people around us as well. We've been very lucky, I would say, with all our colleagues. We've had so lucky with hires over the years. So I think that's a part of it. My brother's in the business. He's one of our top financial advisors. But I think out of all the relationships in my life, I think there's never one where I would say something to Bob like, "Hey, let's try this," and he was like, "No, no, let's not do it." It's always like, "Yeah, let's do it." I don't think there's ever been a
So
no.
let's
every
try it.
time you've gotten
Yeah,
to the
let's
fork
try
in the
it. Yeah,
road,
yeah.
right or left, you've agreed.
Yes.
Yeah, yeah. And there's I would say, Bob, you can speak on this, but I think we have complementary skills. I think there's things I do a little bit better, and there's things that Bob does a little bit better. So we don't really butt heads in terms of our expertise as well.
I can just say this, Michael. It's the greatest joy in my life, working with my son as my partner. Um, we do have a great time doing it. We've been through the good and the bad, over the last 20 years in terms of dealing with the market and dealing with clients and regulatory agencies and everything else you have to do to stay successful. But it's the most wonderful thing in the world to be able to work with your son every single day. And I look forward to talking to him every day, every night. We talk every day. I don't
Yeah,
think there's been a
18
day in the
years.
last 50 years we haven't, our last, I don't know, how old are you now, Ryan? 45, whatever, years. So we've spoken every single day. And it's a wonderful experience, and I recommend it to everybody.
That's incredible. I doubt there's too many father sons on the planet that get to speak every day. So it's really incredible. You, Ryan, you also bring some interesting cross discipline. You don't just have interests in advisory. You're a relatively accomplished musician. How do those two categories, how do they feed into each other? How does the being a musician make you a better advisor? And is being a good advisor ever help with your music?
Accomplished musician is definitely a stretch, Michael. Right? Yeah. The most successful I was is I did play on a whole tour of Eastern Europe with a band once, but no one would say that my musical prowess was great. You would say I definitely enjoyed being on stage, and maybe that's the part that probably correlates more. We've done a lot of media over the course of the last couple of years. We have a podcast. I do a lot of national business every week. We've done radio. So I think maybe I would say my joy of being in the spotlight, I've certainly been able to, move into to Payne Capital as well. And I think that's what I like about it is the journey as an entrepreneur is what I was doing when I started Merrill Lynch 25 years ago is a different job than I have today. Back then I was trying to get clients. I was running financial plans. I was servicing my book. Now I hardly work with any clients. I spend most of my time doing the business development for the firm, doing the marketing and doing a lot of the, like before I'd never had training in being on TV, doing radio, doing a podcast. So we kind of learned all these things as we've gone. I've learned how to even edit, which is painful, by the way. But I think, having Payne Capital Management has been Bob probably would say the same thing, has been ability to do a lot of different careers under one journey, right? Which has been great. So it's not like I've done the same thing every day for the last 18 years we've had the firm, and we're always trying new skill sets, and I think that's been the coolest part of the firm, and in growing the firm over time is just that eclectic expertise that you're able to build.
Yeah, I've read some that you have an interest in human behavior and studying human behavior. Where do you see that in advisory? And if you think about the smart, successful people that you run into, what are some money mistakes that they make if they're not working with you and maybe would benefit? So what are the mistakes that you see these people make from a behavior lens?
That's a Bob question.
Well, it's history doesn't repeat, but it often rhymes, and it's because people never change. I mean, technology has evolved dramatically over the last 5,000 years, but human behavior hasn't changed even one iota, Michael. When it comes to investing, it's really emotional. And, it comes to money, it's emotional. I always like to say, money's like the last taboo. People will tell you about the orgy they were in last weekend before they would talk to you about their money, right? I mean, it's really a strange subject. But, I think that, people get too enthusiastic in bull markets. They get too depressed in bear markets. Um, so it's really all about the psychology of investing. And I think that's the most interesting because when I started back in 75, I believed everybody thought the same way I did. I thought investors thought the same way I did. I thought advisors thought the same way I did. So when I had a chance to train a couple of 100,000 advisors, I was shocked to find how differently people think and what their perspective is on risk and effort. So it's I think the big mistake people make is they think that someone can predict the future, can know what's unknowable, and I think that they become impatient. Investing to me is like eating. It's something you should do every day. You should find a strategy that takes you down to the sleeping point because, the markets will do what it has to do to push you to make a bad decision. And it's, so I think that's always been the biggest mistake. And it repeats. I mean, it's amazing how we sit down with people who embrace our strategy, embrace our philosophy. And then as soon as you get a hot market, they want to chase the shiny object. And they're always the clients that come in with $500,000, $2 million tax loss carry forwards. It's like they didn't learn the first time they lost, their nest egg. So it's unfortunate. Human nature doesn't change, and the markets reflect that. And the markets, that's what I love about the markets. I'm fascinated by the markets because I'm fascinated by human behavior, but it's also why you want to be an investor. I mean, think about it. You get to participate in the greatest companies in the world, run by people whose vested interest is to make that company do well. So you're able to invest with the greatest companies, with the greatest thinkers, and everybody has full access. And all you have to do is let the process happen. And it's just so difficult sometimes, for the average investor, to accept that. And I think Warren Buffett summed it up. It's like, why doesn't everybody copy Warren Buffett? And he says very simply, nobody wants to get rich slowly. People are impatient, right? And so the patient investor who follows a common sense approach always succeed, right? The person who's chasing shiny objects, who wants to be right all the time, always fails. And I've never seen it any different.
That's a really
Yeah, it's like it's a
astute
low IQ
observation.
business, not a high IQ business for sure.
Yeah, such an astute observation. My partner likes to say cash is safe in the near term, very risky in the long term. Stocks might be a little risky in the short term, but incredibly safe in the long term.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it just seems like, I mean, you've seen the stats on this, the amount of professional investors that underperform over time. And I think a lot of it has to do with it attracts many analytical people, right? The financial business. But really, to Bob's point, it's more about understanding human behavior. And we think because we deal with the retail investor, we have the best front row seat to what what human behavior is doing at any given moment. And going back to the contrarian in us, whatever the consensus thinking is, and our clients typically have the consensus thinking, it's probably not going to work out that way. So, just having that intuition that whatever is the consensus opinion on Wall Street or whatever the popular belief is, typically don't walk the other way, run the other way. So you do have to have a little bit of a contrarian thinking to what the herd is doing at all times. It's uncanny, but it seems to be the one consistent that I found in our career.
And that's just, it sounds like something everybody says, but that's something that, if you go back and you look at our podcast, which we've been doing for years, you can go back and see exactly what we were saying during these periods where it's time to be a contrarian. I mean, take the period where 100% consensus estimates by every economist we were going to go into a recession, right? Every
Yep.
professional investor believed that. Our clients believed that. Ryan and I didn't believe that. And we acted accordingly, and our clients benefited because, again, we went against the consensus. And it's always, the market always reflects what the consensus opinion is at the time. It does look forward. And it's so hard when you're in a bear market to see that, or when you're in a bull market to see that. But, one of my famous expressions, Michael, and I've got a ton of them, they're called Bobisms, is that you make all your money in bear markets. And it's just so hard for people to wrap their head around that. But you don't get any bargains in bull markets. You get all the bargains in bear markets. And then you don't have a process, you're never going to be in, to really grab the juicy prices that become available because of human emotion.
I think that's a super astute observation. There's a good prior to launching this fund, when I was just managing my own money, I would be disciplined that on down days, I would force myself to buy something just to take advantage of that. So I think that's a very astute observation. Um, we're kind of maybe one or two or three questions left. What do you see people who haven't built a business, investors just looking in at companies? What do they not understand about the way companies are built? And let's make it a two-part question. What do you really see that founders do differently as they build their companies rather than a professional manager?
Well, I think a big part of it is probably just skin in the game, right? Typically, if it's your own business, you probably own a lot of that business. And I also think it's just the DNA of this is something you've created. So you're clearly going to work harder for something that has your name on it and your reputation on it. So I think there is a lot more at stake. So I think that's a big component of it. And I think the one thing that gets missed today is when it comes to analyzing companies, is analysts can be wrong. Whatever the consensus analysts believe, like they weren't ahead of the curve on this whole AI trend. They've been upping their estimates every single year, keeping up with how much these companies have grown, specifically like the hyperscalers. But on the other side of it, they're probably going to be too late on the other end of it. Right now, all of a sudden, if you look at earnings estimates especially for artificial intelligence, semiconductor stocks, they're so high for the next couple of years that all these analysts have rosy-colored sunglasses on, and they're not going to be able to predict when the disruption happens. So I think that's one of the other big mistakes is relying on the analysts' expectations of the future, because usually their expectations aren't very good.
Michael, having grown up in the industry and working with thousands of financial advisors, both as colleagues and as their coach, when I ran the advanced training program at Merrill Lynch, not everybody's entrepreneurial. I mean, advisors think they're entrepreneurial, but they don't have to put any capital up. They don't have to meet a payroll. They don't have to pay rent. And so not everybody is, like Ryan said, not everybody has it in their DNA to be able to handle the pressure of building a business because it all falls on your shoulders. And I always say that you're not truly an entrepreneur until you're staring at the ceiling at 3:00 in the morning, wondering how you're going to make payroll the next day, or how you're going to pay that loan off to the bank if you're in the manufacturing business. I mean, there's a certain breed of individual that's built to be an entrepreneur, and you have to accept failure, right? Not everything works. And you get there are a lot of setbacks, and it's pretty tough sometimes to sit there and say, hey, what am I going to do tomorrow? How am I going to do it tomorrow? But, if you're a true entrepreneur, in your mind, it's like, well, I'll figure it out. Of course, you'll know what to do. Of course, it's going to work out. So it's, I think that the one thing I've been accused of is being a total optimist. But, as I told Ryan, I think from the day he was born, I've been around a while, Ryan, haven't met any rich pessimists. So optimism trumps pessimism in our household, in our firm, every day of the week.
I think that's an incredible lesson that is really great of you to share, is that, humans are good at solving problems, and optimism seems to win out every time. I want to close it up with a two-parter. Let's tag onto this, which is, I always like to give my guests the floor to kind of talk about anything they want to talk about before we close out. So that's part one of the question. Like, what is the unsaid that you'd like to say? And then as you've been through this journey, like, outside of business, what is something both of you view the world much differently 20 years later than you did 20 years ago? What do you care about now that you didn't care about then, and vice versa?
Ooh, that's a really good question. I think for me, I think it's, I guess because we have quote unquote made it to some extent, right? Our business, of course, you never know, but having a little bit of unbridled optimism, to Bob's point, is a really good point. I think you have to be slightly delusionally optimistic and, see things from the positive that can go, and really kind of somewhat filter out the negative. You can't be too Pollyannish, but I think that's important. But I think, the idea of making it doesn't seem as important now. I think when you're younger, like when I started in this business, I was 23. All you care about is quote unquote success and making it. And financial success, I think, was like an extreme. It was big on the top of my mind, but I think you realize, once you had some success in business, it doesn't change things as much as you think. It does. You still have problems. You still things you worry about. And I think it's not just about financial success, but it's overall success and enjoying the process of what you're doing, which, probably is a little cliche, but I think it's true. I think at this age you wake up and it's really about more enjoying the process than, oh, let's find something we can do to make a lot of money, but are we going to have fun doing this? Are we going to enjoy it? And I think that's always been kind of the ethos for Bob and I as we moved along, is doing things that we like to do, not just doing things because it might make the firm more profitable per se.
I think for me, Michael, I think that the last 20 years has just been confirmation of what I figured out 50 years ago, is that, time passes, markets operate, neither cares what you do, what you think, how you feel. Um, so my message to anyone listening to this is to accept that, right? Accept that you can't control the markets, you can't control time, and you certainly don't want to keep changing your goalposts. Set goals that are achievable and put a process in place and just allow the markets to operate. You allow time to pass, and you don't mess it up too much, right? It's like a bar of soap. The more you touch it, the less you have. Just leave it alone. Let the process work. You'll have success. In terms of the way I view the world, differently today than I did 20 years ago, not at all. I mean, the thing that matters most is family. Making sure your family's happy, making sure they're secure. It's nice that you have success. You're able to help them out and make sure that their process in life might be a little easier than yours. But without your family, you really don't have anything. So all the money in the world doesn't really matter. All the success in the world doesn't matter. Um, but if you do have it and you're able to share it with your family, that's the key. And that's what that motivates me every morning. It makes me get out of bed and makes me look forward, to every day, is being able to share, my life with my kids, my grandkids. That's really what life is all about. And everything else is just noise. If you can just ignore the noise and enjoy your life, I think everybody will be a lot happier.
That's great,
Beautifully
and,
said,
and
Bob.
thanks for
Thank you,
sharing.
Brian.
Well, thank you, Ryan, and thank you, Bob. Really special to get to talk to two visionary founders with great execution to build out a legacy type business to help protect the wealth of the founders that build their own legacy. So thank you for committing the time today. It was one of the best conversations I've had.
Thanks, Michael.